Okay, so we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the penultimate Right Science Club of this calendar year. Good to see you all. Today, we're very fortunate to be joined by Dr. Malika Ihle. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly there, Malika. Sorry if I'm not. She will be talking about reproducible research at Oxford University. Probably one of the best acronyms going around in the open science movement. It's a crowded party, but RROx is pretty up there in the top 10. So just a few things, just to have an announcement of the upcoming speaker next week, who will be our last speaker of the calendar year, and that will be Louise Connell. And she will give us a guided tour of the complexities of open data, and we'll cover different aspects of ethics that you might come across. So I'm just going to seamlessly exit out of this and just do a quick few announcements. For those people who are new to the Rights Club, we're just a weekly seminar series that provides training and raises awareness in reproducible, interpretable, open and transparent science. All of our talks can be found on our YouTube channel. Let me just try and slick onto that. Is it going to work? Sorry, my computer's been a bit laggy. You can also find all of our talks slides on our OSF page. And to keep up to date with upcoming speakers, you can either follow us on Twitter at Right Science Club, or you can check out our website as well. Another announcement to make, the wonderful Matt Wall is planning to do a talk on fMRI analysis for beginners, which is due to take place on the 15th of December at 3 to 5 p.m. UK time. You can sign up via this Google form, or you can join on the day via a link which will be circulated through our mailing lists and onto Twitter. I'll just go back onto our YouTube channel now, it's up there. Please like and subscribe, and check out all of the wonderful back catalogue of videos that we have. Okay, so that's the announcements out of the way. I'll just now go on to introducing our speaker for today. So we're joined by the wonderful Malika. Malika is the Reproducible Research Oxford Coordinator and supporting the steering group in developing a comprehensive approach to open scholarship and reproducible research that's cross-disciplinary and also utilises bottom-up and top-down strategies. She holds a master's degree in biology, and she has a PhD in behavioral ecology, and she's had a few postdocs at the University of Sheffield and the University of Florida, where she organised a post-conference symposium on open science. She also co-authored an invited idea in the Journal of Behavioral Ecology titled "Striving for Transparent and Credible Research, Practical Guidelines for Behavioral Ecologists." She's also the executive committee member of the Society for Open, Reliable, Transparent Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, and also the UKRN local network lead at the University of Oxford. Malika, we're very, very thrilled that you could join us today. So thank you very much for putting an hour of your time aside. I'll hand the keys over to you so you can begin sharing.
All right. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see it. Perfect.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Malika Ihle, and for exactly 1 year now, I have been the coordinator of Reproducible Research Oxford, also known as RROx. And RROx has the ambitious goal of providing a coordinated approach to open scholarship and reproducible research that extends across all disciplines at the University of Oxford. I'm getting a notification that I have a bad signal. Are you still able to hear me correctly? Or should I perhaps turn off my video?
No, that's fine. It's
all right.
Sort of a standard message that comes up, so you can ignore.
Okay. So here's a brief outline of this presentation. I'm going to briefly present RROx's structure, then mention what values I believe researchers share, and after that, I will discuss the current misalignment between these values and researchers' practices due to a lack of appropriate incentives. And then I will continue with presenting RROx activities and give an overview of the content of the trainings that we offer. And finally, I'll discuss how RROx and similar initiatives can help institutions drive a much needed research culture change. So RROx was established in 2016 by Lara Fortunato using seed funding from IT services at the university. It is now steered by an interdisciplinary committee of volunteers with early career and senior representative of each of the 4 divisions of the University of Oxford, as well as representatives from relevant research services of the university. We now have a full-time coordinator, myself, funded by a university award, the John Fell Fund, for a total of 2 years. So I have 1 more year left in this role on this grant. We also often get support from the Bodleian libraries, whether conceptual, financial, or in kind. We are also in the process of creating an advisory board with eminent members of the academic divisions of the university, and soon we will include additional researchers or stakeholders from outside the university. The advisory board will be involved in the annual review of progress and the setting of objective strategies and direction for the forthcoming year. Reproducible Research Oxford was established as the local node of the UK Reproducibility Network when the UKRN was founded in 2018. The UKRN is an academic-led consortium investigating the factors that contribute to robust research and providing training and disseminating best practices and working with stakeholders to ensure coordination of efforts across the sector. So this network currently counts 53 local nodes, which are usually led by early career researchers and whose remits are to build a local multidisciplinary network around grassroots initiatives and to disseminate training opportunity from the UKRN. So in the case of Oxford, I am the UKRN local network lead. There are also 16 institutions who officially signed up to the UKRN, which is where a senior academic has their time reallocated for at least 1 day a week to specifically take on the role of academic lead for research improvement and integrity, and to ensure the coordination of an integrated training on open and reproducible research for all staff and students. So the University of Oxford has not committed to this yet, but I hope they will eventually. In the meantime, while we don't have a senior academic staff with any official time dedicated to these matters, we have our steering group of volunteers, and particularly Lara Fortunato, the RROx lead, who is also a member of the UKRN steering group, and also Dorothy Bishop, who is also the chair of the advisory board of the UKRN. And we also have myself as the local network coordinator. And as far as I know, the only person of this entire network hired full-time to work on these matters. Within our institution, RROx goals and activities align well with the university official commitments, and this is probably why we managed to secure funding so far. RROx aligns with the requirement that all UK higher education institutions must comply with the Concordat to support research integrity, which requires them to provide mandatory training on research ethics and research integrity and demonstrating procedures in place to ensure that research is conducted in accordance with standards of high practice. It also aligns with the University of Oxford commitment to facilitate open scholarship by providing the tools necessary for researchers to publish and share outputs from their research, as stated in its strategic plan. However, as well as the tools, we believe that we need top-down initiatives to encourage researchers to adopt new practices, combined with a bottom-up strategy whereby researchers themselves are supported in developing and implementing new approaches to research and scholarship, as well as supported in providing training to colleagues to spread best practices in the community. And finally, RROx is also promoting the recommendations of reports from the League of European Universities, of which Oxford is a member. The report states for universities and other stakeholders to embrace open science principle, policies and practices, there needs to be a culture change in these organizations if this transition is to be successfully negotiated. But what does it take to change a culture? This is what I'm going to talk about most today. So this is the take-home message of the presentation to come. RROx has been working to help drive the needed research culture change through community building, providing training and promoting practices that are beneficial to the community and sustainable for researchers, and liaising with stakeholders to inform the design of policies. So let's first talk about research culture. There is widespread recognition that the research culture in academia requires reform. Harsh competition for grant funding, prestigious publication, and job opportunities have all been said to foster a toxic environment. Quite importantly, this environment distracts from the core value of the research community. These values are supported by 4 principles: communal ownership of academic goods, universal evaluation of evidence on its own merits, disinterested search for truth, and organized skepticism that considers all new evidence. The opposing value can be described as secrecy of evidence, evaluation of evidence based on reputation or trust, a self-interested motivation for conducting work, and dogmatic adherence to existing theories. These counter-norms can be roughly seen as an unprincipled effort to advance one's reputation or the quantity of output over its quality. So to understand the cultural barriers to adopting those norms, a study asked researchers 3 questions: to what degree they think researchers should follow these norms, to what degree do they follow these norms themselves, and to what degree do they think a typical researcher follow these norms. They found near universal adherence to these core values, strong support with some ambivalence that the researcher in question follow these norms, and strong belief that norms are not being followed by typical researchers. So if academics perceive that every other researchers will act selfishly, how likely do you think they are to adhere to those norms that they otherwise value? So this type of study demonstrates the barriers to reforming research culture. The reason for these barriers is that current incentives for individual success are focused on getting things published, but not necessarily getting their methodology right. And therefore, mere encouragements to reform practices are not enough when researchers have such deep impressions that it will be personally harmful to their career. So people argue that this has led to a replicability crisis, whereby many studies do not reach the same outcome when repeated. This is most visible in the media for fields of research that have impacts on humans, like medicine, psychology, economics. But the causes for this lack of replicability apply to most fields of research. And this in turn has led to a loss of confidence in research by members of the public and researchers themselves. So how do we get out of this crisis? How do we change the research culture, and what does RROx or other similar initiative can promote exactly to encourage a credibility revolution? This is a typical adoption cycle curve, which may be useful to think about the diffusion of an innovation or a new behavior. Regarding the open scholarship culture shift, we are probably still in the early adopters phase, and RROx would like to have the movement get into the mainstream. And for this, several layers of work are required. The strategy to change our culture can be thought about in terms of this pyramid, which helps visualize the interdependencies of these layers. Success at the top is dependent on successful implementation at the lower end of the pyramid. This pyramid does not reflect the level of importance and not necessarily the order in which these layers should be put in place, but really their interconnectedness. So at the base, we need tools for people to be able to do those behaviors. Ideally, tools would be easy to use, integrated in the workflow of how researchers get their work done, and ideally allow them to get their work done even more efficiently rather than less efficiently. On top of that is where organizations such as RROx starts their work, which is developing a community, fostering both descriptive norm, what do other people do in my community, and prescriptive norms. This is what we should do, and this is why we should do it. This work is often missed in change efforts because it's either, well, we'll build something and people will start to use it, or, well, we'll just implement a policy and they'll figure out how to do it. Changing the norms is fundamental so that policies are implemented the way they are intended, and that involves both creating incentives to make it in the researchers' interest to do those behaviors, and policies themselves. In this case, you have to do it if you want the money. Now think of that adoption curve, rotate it and replace the pyramid. This is how the adoption cycle can work, as there are people with very different motivations at different stages of that adoption process. Making something possible is sufficient for people who is on the innovative end because they are just excited about the idea of that new thing. They are willing to tolerate that is not so easy because they want to engage with whatever is the most advanced. Making it easy may be sufficient to the early adopters. They don't mind the others are not doing it yet. They are not needing the incentives to do it. And those two types of people are critical to make it into the mainstream because they provide visible evidence that it can be done, that people are doing it, and that it has benefits. And once they start to shift, we can hope to get a snowball effect. Some people will still need incentives. For them, it's not enough that it is what people do because it's the right thing to do, but rather it needs to be in their own interest to do it, which may be fair enough. And then there are the laggers, people who don't want to do anything new and like to do their own things, but will do it for the money. So how do we implement those behaviors? The base tool is where most of the money is probably needed to build infrastructure, while most of the social work happens in the top three, and it is what RROx is helping to reach by building community, promoting behaviors where incentives align with values, and then liaising with stakeholders to inform the design of policies. So to make it possible and easy, the University of Oxford services such as the Bourgogne libraries, the IT Learning Center, and research services already provide training and resources around open data and research data management plans, open access and copyrights, as well as a very good online course on research ethics and integrity. What RROx proposes is to redirect academics and students to these resources when approached with questions on how to make their research more open and reproducible, but also provide complementary training, both formal and informal. So for this, we are harnessing both bottom-up and top-down approaches, because our experience is that early career researchers have a rapidly expanding demand for training in new methods and for changes to incentive structures to recognize and value open scholarship and team working. Early career researchers at Oxford have already made important contributions to our culture change by taking the initiative to set up journal clubs, seminar series focused on reproducible and open research, and also discussion groups around free and open source software. We also help set up support networks, like for instance, the Oxford Code Review Network, that provide a fresh pair of eyes to review participants' code and allow participants to get better at programming by reviewing others' code. And we will soon be launching an experimental design network working a bit similarly. At the level of the institution, we argue that we need to harness this energy, bringing together existing isolated activities across units to coordinate efforts and to encourage interdisciplinary exchange and optimal use of existing resources. RROx bring together the leaders of these and former initiatives into a network of fellows who are now collaborating and strengthening these existing initiatives, as well as creating new ones. One of these grassroots initiatives born in Oxford, the Reproducibility Journal Club, has rapidly expanded across the world with further support from the UKRN. These meetings now happening online are extremely popular among ECR because it seems to give back a sense of hope and purpose to many of them. So collecting the energy of our RROx fellows, we also co-organize a yearly summer school to deliver a comprehensive open research training over 1 week. We used to have regular software carpentry trainings, which will start again in the new year after we first provide a round of instructor training to multiply our reach. We also ran community calls this summer, mostly regular book clubs around computing skills or Bayesian statistics. And we will soon start running self-standing community calls on specific topics with a very short presentation from 2 or 3 community members, followed by a longer discussion, providing a platform for our community members to interact. And finally, we also organize events like seminars, which aim to be relevant for several disciplines. But we also plan to have events targeting specific groups that we think are perhaps neglected in the open research movement. So for instance, we are planning to have a half-day conference to discuss whether the open science practices fully apply in the humanities or whether we should develop a specific open humanities discourse. With the goal of developing standardized and systematic training, we are also starting to liaise with the skilled training services of each of the divisions of the university, as well as with the doctoral training centers. An important aspect of RROx is that we aim to be relevant for research across all disciplines while recognizing the distinctive needs of particular subject areas. But at this stage, as I am a scientist by training, I provide introductory lectures to graduate students in the sciences when I get invited by graduate studies coordinators, which happens more and more, but this is not quite the systematic training we dream of having. So I think it will either take another grant for me to be able to dedicate enough time to put in place the actual full course that we envision and that could be offered to all students and staff, and be modular to accommodate different needs. Or we will need the university to allocate a senior staff member's time into organizing such course, which they would have to do if the university was to sign up to the UKRN. So what type of new research practices are we promoting exactly in our community? Over this section, the argument will be that the adoption of any additional open research measure that is potentially applicable to a study will enhance the study's credibility. So while the global open scholarship movement is becoming very healthy, not only in the sciences, but also in qualitative research and digital humanities, for instance, some of the measures presented here will only apply to quantitative research. So let's review briefly the causes for the fact that exactly or closely repeated independent studies do not reach the same outcome. I argue it comes from the lack of 2 things. The first one being the lack of reproducibility of studies, which I define here as the process by which, given the same raw data, the same question and the same method, someone of similar knowledge reaches the same conclusions. We could talk about method or computational reproducibility here. Sometimes reproducibility and replicability are used interchangeably, but I will not do that in this presentation. So computational reproducibility is most efficiently achieved by typing all the commands that create a workflow rather than clicking, copying, and pasting, which one cannot trace back. While if you write a piece of code that extract, wrangle, and analyze your files or your data, your whole workflow can be repeated exactly the same way when you get new files or come back to a project after a break or involve a new collaborator. And because such workflow is transparent, meaning that all your steps are written in plain text in a specific programming language rather than hidden behind a graphical user interface, mistakes have a chance to be corrected by the researchers, collaborators, or the community. To make a research study perfectly reproducible, one would need to share their raw data, their code and documentation that process and analyze the data, and sometimes even the specification of their computational environment. For this, specific software can encapsulate one's computing environment and allow them to share it for a perfect reproduction of their project. So there are four major principles to achieve code and documentation reproducibility. And here I will be using example of tools that are integrated within the RStudio environment. So the first one is to create a portable and organized project, like, for instance, a well-structured and self-contained RStudio project that can be run on any computer. The second rule is to create that workflow, and I mean by that at least 1 raw data extraction, and 2 data processing and selection, and 3 data analysis, all coded in R in that example, with scripts that can be reproduced at least by the author in the future and ideally by anyone else. To make this easier, the best is to document scripts and results with figures and reports that will also dynamically change when the data changes. For instance, by using R Markdown, and alternate plain English narrative or even full manuscript section with R code chunks whose output will update automatically if one changes something anywhere in the workflow. And finally, it is best practice to track the changes made to all of these files with version control system such as Git, which stores the changes made and their authors somehow in the background of each file so that one can access any previous version without having to save multiple copies of a file. One can then synchronize online the entire history of a project on hosts like GitHub or GitLab, which also allow to privately collaborate or publicly share workflows once they are ready to be open. So there are lots of resources or groups that offer training for these, and this is an Oxford selection. And these are the typical topics on which I provide workshops within graduate students programs at Oxford. And again, RROx will soon reoffer software carpentry training so that not only students, but also senior researchers or research support staff can establish a pipeline that will work for their project. So far we have been working on the part of the equation that happens after data collection and on which there is broad consensus on what needs to be done. This applies to most disciplines, not only the sciences, as here you could imagine data being anything like the source of a painting or an archaeological artifact. The other slightly more controversial part is what should or should not happen prior to data collection. So we're going to ask whether research studies are actually reliable, that is, unbiased in the many ways that it could get biased. So this mostly applies to quantitative research and to some extent to qualitative research, but as far as I'm aware, will not necessarily be relevant in the humanities. So as humans, we are naturally subject to a large amount of biases. For instance, we overvalue details that confirm our own existing beliefs, also known as confirmation bias. In this cartoon, the person says, I have heard the rhetoric from both sides, time to do my own research on the real truth. But when finding literally the first link that agrees with what you already believe and completely support your viewpoints without challenging it in any way, you feel reassured, confirmed. We also overestimate our ability to predict the future based on the obviousness of the past, the knew it all along effect, or hindsight bias. And when someone says, I knew this wouldn't work, well, no, they knew when facing the outcome. So how do these biases affect research? So in most quantitative research, we accept a false positive rate of 5%. This means that researchers state that there is only a 5% chance that the effect that they find is not real. This means that, for instance, if they find that a drug positively affects the condition of patients, this causal effect could be real should be real most of the time, so we should be good. However, the researcher's degrees of freedom, which is a term that was coined to describe all the arbitrary decisions a researcher can take during the course of collecting and analyzing data, will lead researchers to bring this false positive rate all the way up to 85%. And this is how we end up with most published research being false. This happened when researchers are victim of their human biases and excitement to search for effects, take decision on how to perform the analysis after having seen the impact that this decision has on the results. When they do so, they cannot guarantee that their decision is not influenced by having already seen the outcome of their decision. So for instance, in the case where one decision leads to a result that supports a favored hypothesis, which researcher will then be most likely to publish, while the alternative leaves the result seemingly inconclusive, there may be a very hard internal battle happening and not necessarily a conscious one. Cherry-picking results can be done in many insidious ways. It's often called p-hacking or fishing for significant effect or large effect size. Another version of that is harking, which stands for hypothesizing after the results are known. And that is when a researcher disseminates a result that was found only by chance by performing a multitude of tests, as if this significant result had been predicted from the start, leading readers unable to assess that this result particularly needs replication to be validated. Harking is, in fact, sometimes still recommended by reviewers or editors to make stories more compelling, even though the likelihood of the result being wrong in such cases is very high. So beyond these drawings, which in fact represent cases of intentional misconduct here, I want to emphasize that we all have to realize and accept that our brains have not evolved to be objective, and that with just a bit of self-deception and post-hoc rationalization, we can easily convince ourselves that an exactingly novel, significant result that we obtain is a true result. And as I believe everyone's initial goal when starting a career in academia is to do the most objective and reliable science possible, what can we do not to fall victim of our own biases? What can we do to resolve most threats to reliable science highlighted here in this idealized version of the hypothetical deductive model of the scientific method, whereby scientists first generate a hypothesis, then design a study and conduct it, test the hypothesis with the data collected, interpret results and publish them before generating new hypotheses. So a solution to most of those problems, here in red, selective attention, low statistical power, p-hacking, harking, publication bias, would be to be transparent and blind to the results when we take decisions regarding our methodology, and ideally to get feedback on that methodology before data collection happened and before it is too late to change how we conducted the study anyway. So this is why registered reports were created and offered as a new way of publishing results. Registered reports are, in their initial form, the detailed specification of a hypothesis, prediction, and intended statistical test set in some context. So basically an introduction and a detailed method section that researchers send to a journal for peer review and do so prior to conducting a study. Peer reviewers then give feedback on this pre-registration, that is on the hypothesis, experimental procedure, and main analysis. And they do so blind to the result before data collection, so actually at a time where one can still make changes to the study. The journal then offers in-principle acceptance, after which researchers are allowed to conduct the study. Researchers will then collect the data and add a result and discussion section to their report. And then reviewers assess compliance with the pre-registered protocol and whether conclusions are sound. So final acceptance of the study will not be depending on the results that were obtained. It will only depend on that match between the pre-registration and what was actually done. It will not depend on whether the hypothesis was supported, whether significant effects were found, or whether the results were novel. So this format of paper does change the incentives. It changes what it takes to get a paper published. In this case, it is really about asking an interesting question and designing rigorous methodology to address this question, which finally aligns with our initial values of getting to the truth. So registered reports have been put in place by one of the UK Reproducibility Network steering group member, Chris Chambers, in collaboration with the Center for Open Science in Virginia. There are currently over 260 journals across disciplines that accept or even request those, and the list is exponentially growing. So this shift in the research culture is indeed starting to happen. And while stage 1 registered report resemble a lot the ethics proposal of studies that require one or the mandatory pre-registration of clinical trials, the major advantage of recycling this material into a registered report per se is that the compliance with the design plan is actually checked before publication, so that no biases get introduced after initial approval of the proposal. So this format appears to be appealing to researchers, and I imagine this is because useful feedback and acceptance of the paper happen before one invests everything they have in their study. So to summarize the practices that RROx promotes, we have pre-registration, especially in the form of registered reports, and open and transparent workflows, which are the proof of the reliability and reproducibility of a project, and therefore makes such research more credible. Such preventive and transparent systems make research studies unbiased, systematic, and objective, and make researchers accountable for it. These are the actual evidence that we can show anyone. And if a study ends up not being replicable, one's reputation with their peers, the public, and most importantly, the funding agencies will be preserved. They did the best interpretation possible given the data they obtained at the time. And besides, from my own experience, I actually believe that having such a workflow makes our research process more efficient in the long run and potentially more productive because it creates the opportunity for collaborations. So the main goal of RROx is to help researchers put in practice these values or norms of doing reliable, transparent, and rigorous research. But as we've seen, to change a culture, we not only need to make it normative, we also need to make it rewarding and required to finally enroll everyone. So the real challenge that we face in trying to change an institutional culture is that values, perception, and reality can be different from each other. The institution may value transparency and reproducibility, and it's possible that these values are put into practice in reality in the way researchers are evaluated and their performance is assessed. But it could still be that researchers themselves perceive it differently. Any intervention needs to be informed by an assessment of how values, perception, and reality align or misalign. So for instance, the University of Oxford signed up to the DORA agreements, which are principles that promote responsible use of research metrics for recruitment and promotion. It will be an important question to ask how researchers perceive this value and how this value and their perception match to reality. As a possible avenue to pursue during the implementation phase of DORA and to possibly propose as an alternative to number of publications or the journal's impact factors, and as an alternative that have multiple connection with the activity I mentioned today, I would like to mention the transparency and openness guidelines maintained by the Center for Open Science in Virginia. These are a framework of guidelines or policies that journals, institutions, or funders can adopt to promote transparency and reproducibility in research. Each of these practices, most of which I mentioned today, can be adopted independently and to different levels of stringency. So level 1 is asking for disclosure. For instance, if we talk about data transparency in a journal, an author would have to disclose whether the data is available or not. Level 2 is a requirement. One has to share their data unless they meet sensitivity exception criteria. And level 3 is a verification. One has to do it, and someone is going to reanalyze the data and see if they get the same results. So there is now a community-led database maintained by the COS that rate journals rather than rank them by making the sum of those scores for each measures for a given journal. So eventually, if researchers and founders evaluate journals by their adherence to transparency policies, journals could eventually compete to pursue the best possible policies and research processes. So the coordination of stakeholders, universities, publishers, founders, and societies, so that they move in parallel and in the same direction, is the critical role of, for instance, the Center for Open Science at the global scale, the UKRN at the national scale, and RROx at the local scale. We cannot succeed in culture change unless there are organizations like this to help it. So to summarize, being funded by an internal university fund for 2 years, RROx is working to help shaping the norms by building communities, coordinating new training and seminars that complement what is currently offered, and promoting behaviors where values and incentives are aligned, like with registered reports, and eventually liaising with stakeholders to inform the design of policies. And for this, we will soon launch in January a university-wide survey to assess researchers' awareness, practices, and needs, as well as opinion on open research practices and responsible research assessment criteria. So here are the references that helped me put together these slides, and that's it. Thanks for having me. If you want to stay informed about RROx activities, please follow us on Twitter or subscribe to our mailing list.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Malika, for a very good talk there.
Welcome.
I want to apologise for pronouncing your name wrong, and I'm annoyed with myself because I actually played back the conference, and Laura actually said your name, and I rehearsed it last night, but for some reason I just had an absolute brain meltdown. So Malika Ihle, I believe, is probably the English as close approximation as possible.
That's a German name, and I pronounce it in a French way, so don't worry, right. I don't even know how to pronounce it myself.
Okay, so we're both okay, right? So we're both wrong in a way. So yes, thank you so much. That was a really a nice, comprehensive introduction to a lot of the areas that are problematic in research, and as well as a focused one on your efforts at Oxford. We do have a few questions in the chat. David Calhoun has noted a couple of things that in the, I guess, so his question is, I noticed that there is no statistician on the board. This seems a bit odd. I guess he means the steering group, or there's a separate committee that's involved in directing the Reproducible Research Oxford. So I wonder whether you could comment on that.
So there are representatives of the Division for Mathematics, Physics and Life Sciences, and we need to check what their actual disciplines are, but yeah, they may not be statistician, but they shouldn't be too far off either. So the steering group will is continually changing when people get on with other commitments. So that may be something we should consider for the next round, for when people in that division will move on, and we could try to target specifically a statistician. I think that would be a good idea, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, Dorothy Bishop is on there, and I know she's going into retirement, but she's a violent advocate for better statistics training as well. So I'm sure she will definitely be a well listened to voice to support statisticians and their viewpoints and accurate reporting and dealing with statistics. He also made a follow-on comment, which is to disagree with how you phrased the alpha in one of your slides. So he says alpha equals 5% does not mean you have 5% chance of being wrong. So yeah, I'll just add that in. David is quite a very fastidious when it comes to reporting statistics, so I thought I'd give him a little bit of oxygen there. Another thing is so yeah, another question is, so what initiatives do you recommend if you're operating on a shoestring budget? So RROx seems to be well funded, but I doubt this level of funding is the case for other people at other universities.
So, well, I guess everything that is based with the effort of volunteers, but so there's a lot of grassroots initiatives, like the Reproducibility Journal Clubs is a very good place to start. But actually, even organizing conferences that require some budget could be possible, because you could still ask some resources from the libraries or the IT services of the said institution, because usually those research services are, as part of the infrastructure of the university, are quite well funded, and because your your goals are quite aligned with their remit as well, I think it's often seen that they can share resources to, or share rooms or whatever, but they can often help and actually also provide expertise. For instance, if you were to organize a conference and they could have present talks on copyright or different topics, but I do think a collaboration with them could be also the way to go if you don't have your personal fundings, because they will probably have fundings to share or resources to share.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely my experience. I mean, in a sense, your efforts at Oxford are similar to what I try to achieve at King's, with having an open research working group and the RROx Club. And I found that librarians were key allies in trying to promote and foster open, because it's their bread and butter. That's what they do. I also found that departments tend to have a seminar series anyway, just a department seminar series, and they're always hungry to get speakers in or to have workshops, and they offer, whether it's just to cover catering or stuff like this. So you could incorporate, you could sort of plant certain speakers in those opportunities. So it might not be a standalone initiative, but you can in other ways get support.
Yeah, seminar series or journal clubs are definitely gathering a lot of people and generating like more informal discussion, which is maybe what is the most needed for some, like to get started. So
yes, and so we have another question here from Rina Duta, and they ask, in your role, do you find it a challenge to advise scientists in open science outside your own discipline?
Well, as soon as it is a scientific discipline, I feel this is pretty much the same. I give the same introduction talk to social scientists, medical scientists, or biologists. But when it comes to humanists, this is where I'm falling short, and so I'm trying to get up to speed, and I invite other experts to then advise me to advise people. So I guess yes, outside of science is a bit more difficult for me. But yeah, there's literatures available to get up to date.
And I wonder whether you have noticed as well in certain universities. I'm not saying that this is a general rule, but I won't comment on whether it is a general rule or not, but there is a sort of a power differential as well. And one of the issues that I find is that the most sort of staunch advocates of open research are early career researchers, and they find it difficult to make a speech or comment about open science and the need for more rigor and reproducibility. This is seen as experts and senior academics are typically, they don't take kindly from somebody junior to them telling them that they need to improve their research standards. But you're unique in that you have a role in sort of as a representative of this sort of collective initiative. But I wonder whether there are additional barriers that you have faced and how you navigate those. In addition to the interdisciplinary crosstalk, is there also an issue with your sort of status and how have you overcome that?
Well, actually, perhaps it is because it is the first year, but there's already, for me to reach out to all the community that is already interested, there was already a lot to do and a lot of people to talk to, and a lot of people, even senior people, inviting me to give talk as part of their course or things like this. So I haven't faced yet the resistance. I haven't faced yet the people who are reluctant to these approaches, because we already have a big community to take care of, and this is growing on its own. So, so I guess after the survey, though, once we will get result and write a report and have recommendation for the university governance to perhaps implement, then I guess those people who I haven't encountered yet, and that would be maybe reluctant to implement those policy, for instance, then I guess this is when I will I will meet with them and face that perhaps these challenges. But at this stage, just taking care of that community and coordinated people who are already willing to engage and introducing the topics to new PhD students has been very rewarding. And people, I mean, especially at the early stage, I think this approach of open science is basically the vision of science that we have when we start studying it. So it is usually not faced with reluctance, perhaps just with, this is just so hard to do in practice because we're overwhelmed and lack of time for because of the lack of incentives, basically, but not for the concept of it. So I haven't faced like specific reluctance yet, but I mean, I've been here just 1 year and in a very special year. So I'm not sure the most senior people in the steering group would probably say otherwise. I do think they have met reluctance, but I haven't.
Yes, and it's the same with King's in a way. Is that I've had a lot of support from senior academics who've managed to put me in the room with lots of people who can make decisions, and I've just seen a similar thing voiced from David Calhoun again. He said, you do have support from senior academics. I'm 84 and I've been going on about it for years. It's terrific that it's been taken up by ECR. So that's kind of a nice vote of confidence there. So there's a couple more questions just coming in and just picking up on some of the things that we've discussed. So this one is a bit long, so I'll try and break it down. So following up on that question, so I think they're talking about the funding and shoestring budget. So following up on that question, I'm in changing our research culture, I'm thinking about the slide with what is needed for behavioural change. Do you think for institutions with limited budgets, it is better to focus on the early adopters and make it easy, or to focus on incentivising or making it mandatory and focus on the late majority?
At the level of the institution, well, I mean, we cannot go ahead without infrastructure. We cannot ask people to share their data if there's no, registry to put their data. So I think we cannot avoid that stage, and it is the most costly one, and that needs staff. But usually these are part of the infrastructure. So is this a researcher, or is it a member, like an admin, perhaps a librarian, or? Is the person asking from a researcher's perspective or from like a university organizational staff?
Well, the person is anonymous, but if that person wants to just if they don't mind saying what background they have, what career stage.
Because as a researcher, it's a bit hard to. I mean, there are some initiatives that create infrastructure that are discipline specific. For instance, there's lots of that are organized a bit like with open source projects that are community based and crowdsourced that they could contribute to, because without the infrastructure, I don't think we can go anywhere. But like if it's a person from the university and that there is a trade-off between policies and incentives and infrastructure, again, I think it has to start with infrastructure. We cannot ask people to do things that is not possible or very hard for them to implement.
Yes, so we've had clarification, so it's from a researcher's perspective.
Well, for the researcher's perspective, I think their work would be more like in the middle, like getting people aware, changing the norms, changing what people want, so that the will of the masses is changed, so that then the policies also change and incentives align with what people want, I think.
Yes, and again, similar to what you've said before, just to make it more salient as well, is that I think it's really advantageous to demonstrate a demand, like an internal demand of this sort of stuff. So King's and Surrey recently released a survey on open research practices and what they most value and what's really important for their discipline. But what are the barriers as well? And invariably what findings show is that open data sharing code is really valuable, but one of the barriers is that there might not be the infrastructure there. So you show that within the institution there is a demand from researchers, and institutions need to be seen to meet the demands of their researchers and support research as much as possible. Hence, otherwise they thwart income generation and so on. So you can make a good case from a supply and demand issue, and also I find that social awkwardness really works as well. If other institutions are seen to be making infrastructure changes and a university is not, the question is why not? And I don't know whether that's the same for you. That's kind of like a very sly way of doing it, but it does work, I find. I don't know about you, Malika, where you want to pass comment on that.
Well, I guess if we want to move Oxford, if we want to play that leverage, we would say, oh, Cambridge is doing it, so we have to do it. So we can play that card, I guess.
Yeah, too. UCL is kings. They hate UC. So just find your university's enemy and then just say, look what they're doing brilliantly and what we're not. So we have another question from Rena again. So they say, I may have missed this as I was a few minutes late, but how did your role come about initially? Is it full-time? Which other universities in the UK has this role that you are aware of?
So that's the only role like this that I'm aware of. I hired full-time. It came about because this consortium of academics at Oxford that collaborated voluntarily to change this effort across the divisions needed coordination. I mean, needed someone to help them do this because they don't have any official time to do this. It's all volunteering. So they applied for an internal funding of the university, which they got, and which is paying my salary. And yeah, I've been 1 year on the job, and as far as I know, really, this is the only job like it so far. But I think more and more similar jobs that are perhaps data managers or that are, or perhaps even open science working group managers, but that are more local, for instance, to a department, that are usually also half-time. So more and more are coming up, but like a full-time job at the level of the institution and to represent academics, to represent researchers as themselves, that is not part of the university, for instance, as a librarian. I think that's the only one that I know.
I think that's my experience as well, because believe me, I've been looking for a similar job like yours, Malika. But I know Felix Schombrot has got that initiative with colleagues who have, it's an OSF repository of job adverts with open science mentioned, but that is, again, typically they're not standalone positions of full-time. It's more in existing roles or in part-time, or in the case of another example of what you're talking about, Malika, would be, say, the institutional lead for when you sign up to the UKRN, which is a condition for signing up to an institution. You have to assign an institutional lead. Unfortunately, those, well, not unfortunately, but appropriately, I guess, they fall on more senior academics, but those are usually part-time or some flexi time of an existing role.
Yeah, I mean, it's a minimum 1 day a week, but the fact that they are senior academic and still academic and not just full-time on this also allow them to stay in touch with the research and also sit in many committees of the governance. So I think it is an ideal position, but it's not a full-time position. Yeah. But yeah, there are also other centers like at the LMU in Munich, from as you mentioned, Felix, and they have administrators, perhaps that are also close to the role that I have, and I imagine in the future they may hire someone like me. And also the center in Zurich, they're also quite advanced as well. So I think those two are the most likely to be next in hiring someone full-time if they get the funding.
Yeah, I think the direction of traffic is to allocate more jobs of this type, particularly with the demands from funders to have a research data management plan and almost like an independent statistician as well. So that I think it's in a few years there'll be far more commonplace but that could be famous last words. Okay, so we're now approaching 1 o'clock, and I believe we have exhausted all of our questions. Really nice positive responses, and quite a number of senior academics saying that they're here and they're present and they're very much in support of what open science we can do. So thanks very much.
That's great to hear.
Yes, very, very good to hear. Okay, so thank you, Malika, for an absolutely wonderful, comprehensive talk, very engaging. Thank you again for your time. Next week, everyone will be joined by Louise Connell, who will give a talk about ethics and open data. So please stay tuned for that. Final reminder, Matt Wall will be giving a talk on fMRI analysis for beginners, and this will be on the 15th of December. There is a link in the Q&A for you to put your email down on the Google Sheet. Otherwise, you can find check on Matt Wall's Twitter. You'll see him talking about it there. So until next week, have a lovely weekend. Enjoy the new restriction-free, in some parts of the UK, environment, and yeah, I'll have a good weekend. See you later, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay.